Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa Yukiko Weichbrot, and I am really, really honored to be able to talk and share with you all today. This is my third time attending LDR. I'm a professor at Covenant College. I teach in the art department, and as a half Japanese, half white woman who grew up in Hawaii, affinity groups like the ones that Dr. Irwin Ince was talking about are a little hard for me to come by. There's not like a secret gathering of biracial Asians that get together somewhere. But it has been honestly like such a joy and a restorative place for me to be able to come to LDR and to still be a minority, but in a place where other people understand that experience. So really thank you so much for this community and for your welcome and for your embrace. I have some handouts for you all, teacher probs. So today I want us to think and also to try to do some practical application about what images, particularly images of Black bodies, have to do with the redemptive power of genuine love. And I do want this to be an interactive and a helpful workshop for you. So we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up. If you look, well, actually, I should say this first. Sometimes it can feel intimidating when somebody says, what do you think about this image? I know sometimes when I show an artwork to students, they feel this pressure that they have to say something very profound about it, right? Like, I see the pain of the artist in this image. And the thing is that, I mean, that's fine, but we are making judgments about images all the time, pretty rapidly, without even really thinking about it. And so just for a little bit of warm-up, if you look at that first page of your sheet, and Geraldine can go ahead and turn down the lights for us. Okay. I want you to look at that worksheet and just using your gut reactions, match the letters from the words below to the photographs above. Okay? Don't overthink it. Don't try to think what is the right answer or what is the good answer supposed to be, what's the woke answer. Just match those letters, those words, to the pictures above. And if you find yourself second guessing, you can maybe try to adopt the mindset of somebody else, like your mom or a white member in your congregation or something like that. But we really just want to see, like, what are some instinctual connections that we make with these 6 images. I'll give you a second to kind of look through that. And each photograph might have multiple letters, multiple terms associated with it. That's certainly fine as well. Okay, so even if you're not done going through all of them, let's walk through some of these together briefly. Now, some of these photographs might be familiar to you. They might be ones that you've seen in like a history textbook or something like that. But these are all images that I just found on the internet, like a good art historian, you know. So let's look this first one. This is probably, has everybody seen this photograph before? It's like vaguely familiar, right? Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother from 1936. What are some terms that we associated with this image? What are some things that came to mind?
Like struggling.
Struggling, okay, good. What else? Homeless.
Good mother.
Good mother, yeah, right. This is kind of exists in our imagination as like the good poor mother who just needs a little bit of help from us, and then she's going to be able to like get things going, right? Anything else? Any other associations that we have with this one? Pardon? Authentic. Yeah, it's black and white. It's a documentary photograph. We believe it to be true, right? It doesn't look staged. It doesn't look. It's not posed in a studio or something like that. Anything else with this one? Exhausted. She does look tired. There's all of these visual markers, the wrinkles in her face, the kind of tiredness in her eyes that tell us that she is tired. Anything else? Strong. Okay, so, and this might have a lot to do with our own experiences, right? Perhaps of a strong mother that we have had, that we are able to see this and we think of her resilience in some way. Great. This one really I just found by doing a search for American hero, World War II. And I found James Gavin, Commander General of the 82nd Airborne Division. Any associations that came to mind with this photograph? Patriotic. He's in a uniform, right? American. Yeah, anything else? Citizen. He's doing his duty. Anything else? Noble, leader. Good. Yeah. We don't know. I could have done more research on him. I don't really know what he did. But we have all of these associations. But, oh, yeah, he was definitely a leader. He looks like he was a patriot, right? They may recognize this one, Josephine Baker. This photograph from her time in Paris, from the Wallery studio. What words come to mind with this photograph? Hypersexual. That's something that she's known for, right, historically. Anything else? Exotic, right? She's other. She's a little different. Anything else? Okay. This is her in her famous banana skirt.
She's beautiful.
She is beautiful. And that if hypersexual and exotic are the first terms that come to mind, what does that, tell us? Okay, this one. I was sneaky with this one. I cropped it a little bit on your sheet, so you couldn't see all of this information down here. This is Cephas Williams. He is a Black British activist, and he's the founder of a project called 56 Black Men that some of you might be familiar with. But he organized a whole project of having accomplished Black men in England having their photo taken wearing a hoodie. Okay, and then they would just put these photographs up, billboards, sort of like in the tube, things like that, because he wanted people to think about what their initial kind of response was to this image. So without all that backstory, what do you think some of the initial responses to this photograph might be? Strong. It's very direct, right? He's looking straight at you. Pardon? Moral. Okay, yeah. He looks like he doesn't have anything to hide from us, right? That's the kind of directness. Anything else? Yeah.
I was thinking like anger.
Okay.
He's angry because I feel like now having a hoodie on as a Black man is such a huge statement. Nowadays, like you can't wear it. You can't. No. Every picture you take with that is just like it means so much behind it.
So it has like a kind of defiance to it. Yeah. Anything else? Good. What about this one? What were some associations with this one? Beautiful, authentic. Did anybody put professional? This is Kimberly Drew. She is a very well-known right now independent curator. When this photograph was made, she was actually at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in charge of their social media outreach campaign. And this is her professional headshot as part of that role, right? And so I'm sure all of you have heard the stories or perhaps even experienced some of that tension of what is a professional hairstyle for a Black woman. And so here's Kimberly Drew, who is working at one of the most prestigious museums in the world, really. And this is her professional hairstyle. And yet that's maybe not the first thing that comes to mind, of like, this is what a professional woman should look like. One more. What comes to mind for this one? Patriotic, citizen.
Beautiful and American, because growing up, this is the image that we would have been shown as what it means to be a beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
And truly American, like Black.
Yeah, she's wrapped in a flag. We have "See to Shining Sea" in the background, right? We have like a field. This is actually the cover of a book called American Beauty that was published by Vogue magazine. And so if this is, the go-to image for one of the most powerful publishing houses for beauty and fashion in America, this does tell us something, right, about what our kind of the dominant culture's default expectations are for American and for beautiful. Great. So even though you didn't have much information about any of these photographs, we had these seemingly instinctual responses to them. Now, on the one hand, that kind of response is super interesting to sociologists and to marketers because they want to make money off of that, right? You're categorizing people at the really quickly. But for me, as an art historian, I'm really fascinated by how images circulate in society and how they impact our habits and our expectations of others. So I'm really interested in how images can either help or hinder us from being able to see the Imago Dei in all of its fullness. What I want to do today is talk about three things. I want to give some historical context for the role that images have played in constructing our idea of race. And then I want to talk about how we can build a better archive of images for ourselves and for those of us who are parents, for our children as well. And finally, I want to talk about the power of a redemptive look of love. What does it mean to look at images with a redeeming look of love? Oh, look, I had like a whole outline for you. But you have that too, I think, in your packet. Okay, so first, some history. The very notion of race as a social category is inextricably tied with visual representation. So in the 19th century, when scientists want to put forward this theory of polygenesis, when they want to say that there was not one creation, there were two creations, so there are that Black people and white people are actually not the same human. They are not both descended from Adam and Eve. Part of how these pseudoscientists support their theory is through images. So 1839, the anthropologist Samuel Morton publishes these comparative charts that align African skulls with the skulls of apes to sort of show that they are visually similar to each other. And then here in 1854, Josiah Nott and George Glidden released this large, lavishly illustrated volume that uses images to prove the existence of a racial hierarchy. And again, it's important that a lot of this development of our idea about race is made through comparison and contrast, right? So it's not just one of these images by themselves, it's let's compare these against each other. Also, side note, yes, the example of a white person that they use here is not an actual human, it's a Greek statue that is being used as the example of whiteness, okay? So, but it's perhaps photography more than any other medium that really impacted American notions of race. And in fact, the artist and theorist Coco Fusco writes, quote, rather than recording the existence of race, photography produced race as a visualizable fact. Okay, so photography is not recording race. Photography is teaching you a new way to see and a new way to categorize people. So anthropologists create these sets, these visual tropes that are meant to call attention to physical difference, certain ways of photographing people. And so one example that we have here is from, they're taken by the photographer J.T. Zealy, but they were commissioned, sorry that this text got cut off, by the Harvard naturalist Louis Agassiz. And Agassiz was Swiss, but he was working for Harvard University, and he wanted to create a kind of visual encyclopedia that compared the races. And so he hires a photographer in South Carolina to make a series of images of enslaved people at a plantation. And men and women were stripped to the waist, sometimes stripped entirely, and made to have these photographs taken where in these sets, facing perfectly frontally forward, facing perfectly in profile, facing from behind. And so this trope of anthropological photography in Agassiz's mind was this is going to show that blacks and whites are different from each other. Now, of course, he never makes comparable photographs of white people. In his mind, he doesn't have to do that. These are sufficient in and of themselves. But it's important that it's not just that black and white people are different, but that he expects a viewer to be able to look at this and to see Jack as being inferior. He's going to locate these in a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy of race. Okay. Now, racial hierarchies were visually enforced through both subtle and overt means. In the early 19th century, the Long Island artist William Sidney Mount became very well known for painting what we call genre scenes, so just like paintings of everyday kind of casual gatherings of people, maybe workers in the field, things like that. And free black figures, because he's painting in New York, so free black figures show up pretty frequently in his work, and Sidney Mount has a reputation historically among our historians for showing blacks as being dignified. Now, when you look at this painting, Rustic Dance After a Sleigh Ride, this is pretty typical of Mount's paintings, where the black figures are happy, they're cheerful, and they're almost always in subservient positions, right? So here they're on the literal margins of the painting. They're the ones who are providing the actual support. They're utilitarian. They are the ones who are providing the support for the whites who are having a good time here. They are playing music. They have just driven the sled. They are helping to tend to the fire. And the idea is that as long as they stay in these margins, then some kind of coexistence is possible. If they stay happy and kind of carefree here, then everything is going to be okay. And part of what makes Mount's paintings seductive is because they look pretty naturalistic, right? They're not photographic, but they look like the world that we see around us. And so you kind of think, oh, I guess that's how things are. I guess this is the way that things should be. Now, this is maybe a more subtle way of policing racial hierarchy. There are also much more vicious ways of policing. And I'm not going to show you a lynching photograph. This is the obverse of a postcard. On the front of this photo postcard, there is a photograph of Will Stanley, who was lynched in Temple, Texas in 1915. And the text reads, "This is the barbecue we had last night. my picture to the left with a cross over it, your son, Joe. So on the front of this, there's a little mark in pen, and he's sending this to his parents through the mail. I was here. I participated in this public, vicious expression of white supremacy, and it was documented through a photograph, and it traveled through the U.S. Postal Service, and hundreds of these postcards exist, crisscrossing, through the mail as this constant reiteration of white supremacy, right? And the thing is that these images don't just impact white people's perception of a racial hierarchy, they also impact Black Americans' perception of their place in a racial hierarchy and what they can expect their bodies to experience. So there is this mind-blowing story of a young man named James Cameron, but not James Cameron of the Titanic, who miraculously survives a lynching attempt in Marion, Indiana in the 1930s. And when he writes his memoirs later, he describes his experience of that night photographically. He is playing forward in his mind what he thinks is going to happen to him based off of the photographs of lynchings that he has already seen, right? So these images are actually ordering his experience of his own body. These are very, very powerful things. Now, because photographs are so powerful, they are also used for a kind of opposite purpose. Frederick Douglass, the most photographed person of the 19th century, he knew that photographs had power, and he wanted to create a kind of alternative visual narrative of what Black masculinity could look like. And so he goes to the daguerreotype studio and to the photography studio over and over again to have his photograph made and then to have it disseminated so that people can see it. But you might also know that the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, the photography plays a hugely important role there too, right? And so when Mamie Till sees the broken body of her son, she requests to have this photographed, and she sends those photographs to magazine publications asking them, you make other people see what they did to my son. And it's only the Black publications that end up showing those photographs. But she knew that these photographs were important, right? She knew that they had this kind of power to them. One thing we not to be aware of, though, is something that the historian Martin Berger has written a lot about, is that there are certain repeated tropes that we see in abolitionist and civil rights photography. And that trope is of the Black body in pain, the sort of suffering Black body that is receiving anguish, right? And so we see it in this photograph of the so-called scourged back, and we see it in the most iconic of civil rights photographs. This repetition of Black bodies in distress as helpless supplicants dependent on white intercession to save them from white abuse. There are photographs of active Black bodies, believe it or not, in the civil rights movement, but those photographs tended to be relegated to the Black press, the ones that became most visible, the ones that have had the most kind of historical staying power were in mainstream dominant culture white press, and those almost always tended to have the Black body in distress rather than the Black body as an agent of change. Okay? Now, these images matter because new images are neither created nor viewed in a vacuum. Anytime that you see an image, you are slotting it into your archive, right? So everybody has this kind of mental filing cabinet with with all these folders in their brain. And when we see an image, we're going to slot it into its appropriate folder. So you saw the image of Josephine Baker, and we went like this, and then we found the folder for exotic, and it goes in there. This is what a hero looks like, things like that, right? Now, I teach college students. They don't know what a filing cabinet is. So we talk about this like a Google image search in your brain, right? So when I say sunset and you do a Google image search in your brain, something like this kind of comes up where you all know what like a good sunset looks like, right? And it's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, that looks like a photo because you've seen photos that look like that before. And that's kind of an innocuous example, but this visual archive that we have can also be more socially charged. So if I do a search for beautiful hair, and this is what comes up, then what does that tell us about what our expectations are for beautiful hair, right? So our visual archives are particularly potent when it comes to identifying and policing bodies. Images, particularly images of those on the social margins, teach us what heroism, morality, fame should look like, and it does so largely through contrast. So this is what is desirable and powerful and noble and patriotic. That is what is not. That is the person on the margins. And so all of these images, the formerly enslaved man, the happy-go-lucky black musician, the desecrated bodies of lynching victims, the bodies of black protesters in distress, all of these influence how we understand the past, but also what we might expect from ourselves and from our neighbor today. They create categories through which real lived bodies are understood. And as you all know too well, this is a life and death issue, right? The very lives of image bearers is at stake. Because let's be honest, Trayvon Martin goes into a different archival category than Dylan Roof, right? But these archives are not hardwired into us. It's not like you are born with this archive and so you're just stuck with it forever, right? We have power. We have the ability to craft an archive that is more textured, is more nuanced, is more expansive, and that can help us see that all humans bear the Imago Dei with equal dignity and work. And we can also encourage others to broaden, to expand their archive as well. So here's where I want to try to get really practical. How can we expand our archive? How can we grow the set of images that we have in our mind? So I have 3 main suggestions for that. Okay. The first is to look for images, underexplored historical images, the ones that didn't get popular. And so sometimes you can do this just by looking on something like eBay or auction websites where these old family albums are being put up for sale. And you can see these historical examples of people living their lives with a kind of fullness of humanity. They're not doing anything super heroic. They're not doing anything that is, really has great historical impact. But they are being image bearers. They're dressing up. They're delighting in their baby. They're taking a picture of their first car. Things like that. That can actually be like really, really powerful stuff. But we also have, this unexplored resource of, again, photographs, historical photographs that have not become iconic. And I've given you a list on maybe the back or second page of your little packet, just a kind of list of places that you can start to look for some of these historical images that might be less familiar. These are photographs by Gordon Parks that he takes for Life magazine in 1956. He goes to Mobile, Alabama, and he does a whole photo essay there. How are these photographs different than the ones that might initially come to mind of Alabama in 1956 or the 1950s?
They portray children.
Okay, so we have families that are being present here, particularly young children. What else is different here? Yeah.
It's sort of peaceful because they're pastels. They're not just like really harsh colors.
Mm-hmm. So the color makes it peaceful. Anything else that the color does
It
for
also
us?
shows the segregation aspect of things is still there because you see like white only, but
Mm-hmm.
you also see, they're drinking from the other fountain and they're not like, I don't know, like mourning.
There's no
Okay.
distress.
They're making a choice, right?
Yeah.
Of
They're
how-
performing.
Yeah.
It's like they're okay with what's going on. It's fine. And we've adjusted. I'm calm. I know my place.
Mm.
I'm
Right, okay,
waiting,
so that's
peaceful.
interesting because they're not making like a big deal about anything. But you can also maybe think about it as people who are like making these everyday decisions about how are we going to negotiate Jim Crow. You know, is this the day that we take a drink from the white only fountain, or is this the day that we just keep things the way that they are? You know, and what's at stake if I make one choice or the other? For me, a photograph like this helps me understand the kind of the mundane, everyday, this is how your reality is of Jim Crow, rather than here's this one kind of heroic moment where we're fighting back, right? And the color, does that help? Yeah.
In this image, their humanity isn't being stripped away.
Mm.
Like in all the other images where you just might see, scars on their back or being attacked by dogs. They're a family going out for, family time,
Mhm.
talking for water.
Mhm.
Segregation sucks.
Yeah.
They're existing in the world.
Yeah.
But it still gives you that white only, and you feel a little sting of
Mhm.
that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Like-
actually gets hard for me because of the fact it's in color.
Yes.
I notice it more.
Mhm.
Looking at the little girl looking at the mannequins and realizing the other one was like me.
Yes.
That's why it's not.
Yes.
I think one thing like you focus on, first of all, I'm from Mobile, Alabama.
Oh.
And so I don't know exactly, it looks like Dolphin Street, but I'm looking at the man.
Mhm.
And black man, 56, he's not aggressive.
Mhm.
He is actually, seems that he's guiding his kids, so he's being a leader there, but it's not the normal caricature or the way we, especially black males.
Yeah. This is so tender, right? This like little gesture of helping his daughter to reach this water fountain.
Similar. I see the loveliness in it, and I also like their clothes.
Oh, I know.
Tattered, torn.
Mhm.
This right here shows that.
Mhm.
And we keep wearing what we like.
Yes. There's another beautiful image from this set of folks outside of church, and they're just like all decked out in all these like beautiful pastel colors from the 50s. It's gorgeous. And sometimes with black and white photographs, it's maybe a little easier to distance ourselves from it. Like that's old. That happened in the past. When it's color, it's like, this is familiar. Like I know this, I feel this, I can recognize it a little bit more, right? There's so many more of these. Go look these up. Yeah.
I think what's also it just kind of stuck out to me is the little girl watching what's probably her older sister and her dad. Like, I don't know, it just kind of that psychological image of watching. This is my older family, and now I'm next in line, and this is what I have to subscribe to.
Yeah.
It's just kind of,
Yeah. I mean, formally, this image, the way that there's this column of negative space right here around that white-only water fountain, almost like a force field, right? That just like nobody is encroaching in that space. You know, Gordon Parks knew what he was doing when he sort of saw this moment and took this photograph. Yeah.
The one on the right, it's really interesting where like the black folks are real, but the white folks are like mannequins. You know, but like it's like a false reality.
Right, and the false is the one that is aspirational, right? It's what I want those clothes. I want to be in that space. Good. Love these photographs.
I guess maybe the one on the right, it reminds me of what my mom used to tell me, that they go window shopping. And when they went to shop for clothes, you had to know the size because you weren't allowed to try them on. So you had to, you either got it right or got it wrong.
Yeah. Right, and so the color helps with that again, right? There's sort of like making this part of like a very immediate kind of experience. Good. Now, another example that we could think about comes from the National Archives. The National Archives at the Library of Congress have actually done an extraordinary job of making important visual and textual resources on African American history accessible online. I realize that not everyone is a nerd like me who loves spending lots of time on the Library of Congress website, but there's a little link that you can go to where they've actually pulled out these big sets of photographs of Black servicemen, Black servicewomen, and families on the home front in World War II. So folks who are part of these bond drives or who are getting ready to send their dad, their grandpa, their brother off to war, and they are remarkable. There's these sets of Black officers in their dress uniforms. And you're like, what if we could expand our archive so that when we say American hero, something like that comes to mind just as much as something that looks like the James Gavin photograph, right? Or when we think about the 1950s woman or the 1940s woman, that these women who are learning how to weld stuff comes to mind just as much. And in some of these archives, there are also some color photographs as well. And I'm a little partial to the color photographs, but those are also like really, really beautiful. Okay, I want to keep moving and show you another strategy for expanding your archive. Might be to look at contemporary artists who are purposefully trying to engage with negative stereotypes of dominant culture. So again, I've given a list on your handout of some artists that you can start to look at and to dig into. But I just want to highlight two of them that are probably familiar to many of you already. First, Kehinde Wiley, most famous for what?
Obama's portrait?
The Obama portrait, right? So Wiley has developed this practice starting back in the early 2000s where he would go out in his neighborhood in Harlem and he would sort of cast models on the street, right? So he'd find a young man and he'd take him back to his studio and he'd show this man, because he starts off just painting men, show him an art history book and say, choose a pose from this art history book. Choose a pose that makes you feel powerful, choose a pose that makes you feel important. And so they would, and all of these paintings and these art history books would be of white Europeans, right? And so then Kehinde Wiley poses these young men in their street clothes, adding in, he didn't have a sword while he was walking down the street, but he'll add in a little historical prop, and then pose them in these ways, and then have them against these beautiful, elaborate, ornate backgrounds that are kind of twining and twisting around them. And so you know that this is not a rewriting of history so much as it is calling out history, right? Like, why does this look shocking to us? Oh, it's because I've never seen a Black man in a position of power like that in a large-scale oil painting. These are huge. They're just as big as the originals. yesterday in my intro to art history class, we were talking about the history of horses in Western art history as like a way of whetting their appetite. And we talked about all of these paintings of white men on horses that are rearing up, you know, like Napoleon on his horse and like everybody. And then there's a whole other subset of those, of these equestrian portraits, where there's a black servant who's in the background, who's a support staff, as you will. And then I told them, you know what makes this amazing is that Old Town Road, when Lil Nas X is on his horse and it's rearing up in the street, that is impactful because of art history. I don't know if Lil Nas X knows anything about art history. I'm probably guessing no. I'm gonna guess no. But it makes, you know, what he's doing is something similar to what Kehinde Wiley is doing, where he's saying, hey, let's like shake up the archive. Let's put something different in there instead. And this painting here is one that he made for the St. Louis Art Museum. This was a special exhibition last year, I think it was last year, where he found residents from Ferguson and from St. Louis City and had them pose based off of paintings that are in the St. Louis Art Museum's permanent collection. Okay. Do we know this woman? What is Amy Sherald famous for? She's famous for Michelle Obama's portrait, okay? And not as well known as Kehinde Wiley, but go to look at her portfolio. Her practice is one of making these sort of, you know, mundane, everyday depictions of a range of ways of being black. And she always uses this practice of painting the skin tones in black and white, and then putting the subjects against these brighter backgrounds and contemporary clothes. And she says that the reason that she paints the skin in black and white is because it reminds her of old black and white photographs of African Americans, and sort of suggests to her that they have a history, right? That they exist in the now, but that they also have a history that they can be proud of. And so she wants to kind of bridge that gap. Again, beautiful, beautiful images. Now, one more strategy for building a better archive. Think about, because we live in a culture that is so image-driven, okay? We are all taking photographs. We are all, or many of us, are posting photographs on social media or something like that, right? And then maybe it gets to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and you're going to post a photograph of Dr. King with a quote. Or it is Sojourner Truth's birthday, and you're going to post an image of Sojourner Truth with a quote. This is the perfect opportunity to do a little bit of digging, to do a little bit of historical research, and to find a new image to share. Okay? Now, there are only so many photographs of Sojourner Truth out there, right? But you could find maybe an image like this, a woodblock print by the African-American artist Elizabeth Catlett, where rather than Sojourner Truth seated, looking all prim and proper with her little daguerreotype, here she is preaching. She has the Bible open in front of her. She's erect. She's pointing her finger. It's this bold kind of graphic image, right? And so when we make decisions about what are the images that we're going to circulate, right? So when you want to post an image commemorating civil rights, what image are you going to choose? When you want to post an image commemorating a historical figure, what image are you going to choose? We can actually be part of helping expand other people's archive and sort of offering these alternatives, right? Adding a little bit more texture to what it is that people see. Any questions about this so far? What do you guys think about that? Does that sound like a lot of work to have to go look for new things?
I don't know if you remember, I don't remember which shooting, there was a gentleman that actually saved some kids, an African-American man. He saved some kids' lives, And they had the very first shot, it was the guy with a t-shirt and a do-rag on. And then they found some pictures of him as a soldier, because he was a soldier, and they started running the picture of him in his military uniform. But of course, I had to post the one with the do-rag because that's my brother. That's what my brother looks like. He may have been in the army, but this is an African-American male, and this is what he looks like. And he was a hero. Sorry. That just made me upset when they stopped using that image and started using the other one.
Right. And maybe part of it is almost like not making, saying we're only going to use this one and not that one. It's like, use the swipe feature in Instagram, post two, put them both up there.
I think like listening to all of this and kind of thinking how it applies to me, like me, an avid Instagram user.
I want to follow you.
Just thinking about like how much power we really have, just as people use social media. Because even, you post a picture, you get 200 likes. That's just one picture. Versus if I chose to post this on a certain day, or chose to post something, or put it on my stories, so many people can see so many different things, and that we can we have a lot more power than we think we do to kind of change the narrative of what we're viewed as.
Yeah.
So.
Right, because you have agency over these images, right? Like you are not controlled by the images. You can do something with them. Yeah.
I appreciate your expertise at this. I just was wondering, from what you, given your expertise at this, would you say this process is what Beyonce was doing at Coachella?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes.
That's a topic we can talk about all day.
Oh, okay. I didn't put my Instagram handle on this, but if you go to @AlyssaBrote on Instagram.
So she was doing this self-consciously.
Oh yeah, she is so self-conscious about how she is engaging with the archive. Oh, the question was, is Beyonce doing something like this when she performs for Coachella, right?
Is she doing this self-consciously?
She is doing this self-consciously. I watched the documentary about it because I'm that deep, and and she is very thoughtful about like what visual resonances she is drawing from, and I think in her maternity photo shoots. I think in her Vogue photo shoots that she was the creative director for, that she is very intentionally thinking about how can I disrupt the visual archive? How can I take existing ideas of what is beautiful, what fertility looks like, what good motherhood looks like?
She's basically doing Frederick Douglass.
She is doing Frederick Douglass, yeah. And so I'm a little, like a tiny bit obsessed with this. And so if you look in the highlights of my Instagram stories, I have Beyonce's maternity photo shoot kind of take down. I have Beyonce's, I didn't do Beychella, I have Beyonce's, I have the video of the Carters in the Louvre and kind of going through what they're doing with their, some stuff about photographs from Ferguson and which ones became popular and which ones didn't. So yes. Beyonce is doing this. You know who else is Kendrick Lamar?
Yeah.
He knows Gordon Parks, and he uses Gordon Parks images in some of his videos as well. So there's lots of folks who are doing this, and we just have to like amplify it, you know?
When he appeared on Ellen DeGeneres, he said what he did there.
Yeah.
That performance, drawing from the 20s dance styles.
Mm-hmm.
He said that's what he was doing.
Yeah. Great.
I'm just thinking, like, how do we really balance as well? Because, like, I suffered a lot of racism at my high school, and I'm an artist, so I interpreted, like, I identified with the images of pain and suffering in many ways. And so I portrayed that in my work for time. And so I'm just thinking, like, what's the balance of, like, showing that, but also showing success and showing, like, just a balance.
Right. So the question is, how do we balance showing images that are perhaps more positive with images that are truthful accountings of pain, right? Truthful accountings of what has been suffered. And I think about it a lot like a diet, you know, that you can't have, if you are only eating, sorry if anybody's on keto, if you're only eating red meat, things might get a little bit off eventually for you, right? And if you only are eating sugar, you're going to be useless for everything later. So how do you kind of balance out? How do you, and I think this is going to be different for different people and different communities. How do you cultivate a visual diet that you are both ingesting but then also producing for others that has this kind of balance to it? So I don't think that there's like a perfect, 2/3 this, 1/3 that kind of thing. But I definitely don't want to say that we should never look at those images from civil rights, right? I definitely don't want to say that we shouldn't look at, on occasion, that we should grapple with the realities of lynching photography. I think those are important to look at and to see. If those are the only images that we are showing, I think that comes with its own sort of set of problems. I want to kind of end with this. Expanding our archives doesn't mean that the dehumanizing, humiliating, gut-wrenching stuff goes away, right? White supremacy is part of our national history, and so if we're going to be truth tellers about that, we are going to have to confront and grapple with those images. We are going to have to point to them and say, this is a purveyor of white supremacy. But it can be exhausting. It can be traumatizing, and I want to acknowledge that, and I also want to encourage you that because you are image bearers, you are not bound in submission to the image, okay? You bear the image of God. The image does not have power over you. It does not have the final say. And so what I want to encourage us is to develop a practice of restorative looking that is powered by genuine love. Jesus demonstrates a restorative gaze in his interactions during his earthly ministry, right? Time and time again, Jesus sees, he identifies, he acknowledges, he dignifies people who are living on the margins. He sees the bleeding woman, he sees the tax collector, the prostitute, the uninvited woman who washes his feet with her tears, the cripple, the slave whose ear was sliced off by the impetuous Simon Peter. He heals bodies and forgives sins, and he affirms the value of all of these lives. And in addition, many of Jesus' parables warn against blindly assuming that the person who looks holy is actually holy, right? And so when we who have the Spirit of Christ living in us, we can ask to be able to see as God sees, right? We can ask for the ability to see the Imago Dei fully. Now, what we can't do is restore bodies and forgive sins as Jesus does. And yet, are we not called to be his hands and his feet while we wait for his return? And so it follows that we should also have his eyes, that we should restore dignity in all the places where the Imago Dei has been stripped and deformed and humiliated. And we should be doing this in our daily encounters with our neighbors, but we can also do this in images. And so I just want to end by returning to this image of Jack, right? And rather than saying that photograph of a slave, let's say, I see you, Jack, right? That even though this photograph was intended to dehumanize, that we can look at it and we can grieve over the indignity and the trauma of having been objectified and commodified. Like Jesus, we can pause in the middle of the crowd and we can see that bleeding woman and we can say, I see the image of God in you, right? Our recovery of Jack's image bearing does not undo the reality of the humiliation that he experienced. But this kind of restorative gaze does initiate a process of bearing witness to the lives of other image bearers. We say, we see that the Imago Dei has been dishonored, and we protest. We cry out against that. We do not recover dignity for the sake of identity politics or personal pride, but because we believe in a God who demands justice and who is coming back to judge the living and the dead. We see the Imago Dei here because we long to see as our Savior does. And I think finally and most vitally, this process of looking at an image that was meant to humiliate and to say, I reject that and I see you, Jack. This can be a reminder to ourselves, and particularly to you, my Black brothers and sisters, that although your bodies have been dehumanized, although your bodies have been objectified and distorted, you have inherent dignity that has been granted to you by the creator of the universe. And sometimes it is easier to say that truth to other people, to Jack, than it might be to say it to ourselves, right? But in this process of restorative looking, of saying, I see the Imago Dei where it has been hidden, where it has been concealed, we are speaking this liturgy, this truth to us over and over again. I matter, I have worth, I am beautiful in the eyes of God. And so I hope for you, I'm gonna follow all of y'all on Instagram now. But I hope that this has given you some ideas about how you can be part of this restorative looking and this expansion of this visual archive that we all share. Geraldine, am I supposed to send them off to something?
Awesome.